I'm Sarah Beck, Director of Programs and Education at the American Public Gardens Association, and I will be your staff representative during this Idea Cafe. Before we begin, here are a couple of tips to get the most out of your virtual conference experience. First, if you're experiencing poor video or audio quality, we suggest closing other programs on your computer, especially other browser tabs. Your inbox will still be there at the end of this session, I promise. If you have any other problems or questions, association staff are available to help. Give us a call at 610-708-3010 or send an email to info@publicgardens.org. Finally, you may submit questions using Zoom's Q&A function that you will find in the Zoom toolbar. Questions can be submitted anonymously. All questions for this session will be responded to after the session and shared with all attendees. Thank you and enjoy today's session.
My name is Maylin Plummer. I'm an IDEA committee member and I've been involved for almost 3 years. I've seen the importance and necessity of this committee grow, but also experienced how challenging it is to address the complexities of such big, messy, and uncomfortable topics. But we cannot make a difference and do better without stepping into discomfort or engaging in the hard work of change. It doesn't always feel like we are making progress, and sometimes it might feel like failure. But each step, I think, is necessary towards creating a world where change can happen and everyone belongs. We decided to focus today's Idea Cafe on the topics of race, ethnicity, and justice. If you follow social media at all, it would seem that almost everyone has become an overnight expert on bias and racism. There are a lot of conversations happening right now, so today's cafe was an opportunity to be a part of it, but within the context of environmentalism and public horticulture. It's a privilege for me to co-host today's Idea Cafe with, along with some others, Sarah Beck and some of our committee members, and share the mic with two guest speakers, Anna Brunner and Abra Lee. Anna Brunner is the Equity and Justice Manager for the National Wildlife Federation. She grew up in the Midwest, born in Iowa, raised in Illinois, with continued education in Ohio and Michigan. Her academic educational background is in environmental studies, history, and ecology. Her lived expertise is in working with people's passions and emotions in a diplomatic and loving way. She believes in collective liberation and that we all have a role to play in making the world a better place. Also with us is Abra Lee. She is the visionary and owner of Conquer the Soil, a community that celebrates horticulture beyond the world of plants. She has she spent a whole lot of time in the dirt as a floriculture intern, municipal arborist, county extension agent, and landscape manager for 2 international airports. Abra is a graduate of Auburn University College of Agriculture and a recent graduate of the Longwood Fellow class of 2020. Congratulations, Abra.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start us off with just an initial question just to kind of get going here. I would love for you to introduce yourselves with some professional context, but also give us a small amount of background on how your personal experience frames how you approach conversations about justice, equity, and race.
So for me, Maylin, I will say this, I'm a horticulturist, I'm a storyteller, I'm not an organizer, I'm not an activist. But I am very well aware of what it is like to live and breathe and move in the world as a Black person. And I want to be clear on the context of that because I also recognize that even though I fully experience the Black experience, I also have to own I experience from a level of Black privilege, okay? I grew up very upper middle class. I went to the best schools. You know, I went to a PWI, predominantly white institution at Auburn. And I still, every day, and always will educate myself on the fact that Blackness isn't a monolith. And the experience of myself is not even the experience of my first cousin. So I think that that is something that needs to be said, and people need to understand that, you know, if your understanding of Blackness is Abra Lee, you're getting a very safe perspective. And you really need to understand that it's a very holistic thing that we go through being Black, and it is at many levels, and it is difficult in many ways for many people.
Thanks for that introduction and context, Abra. I think that's really, really important. And in introducing myself, I also really want to focus on my own lived experience before going into professional context here. So my name is Anna Brunner, and I grew up in Southern Illinois, which is coal country. And in coal country, abandoned strip mines dot the landscape, and in some places there are disfigured hills and stagnant ponds. And growing up in this space as a child, this really confused me, because what I knew about people in the environment made me think that this shouldn't have happened. We all need clean air to breathe and clean water to drink and healthy soil to grow food. And yet I was presented with clear evidence that this was not true. The land was harmed, and I wanted to understand why that was. Digging in, it became clear that forces like capitalism and racism were behind much of the history of my place. Folks were trying to make a living, and that meant digging up coal. Unions were also segregated, and scabs were called in during strikes in my place's history, and these folks were often African American. Again, folks who were trying to make a living, and now playing out pitting Black folks against white folks. As I grew up and I learned more, I could see around me that there were segregated towns and that racism dotted the landscape to match the coal fields. Increasingly, I understand that more of what drives us apart and furthers injustice happening in our world are these large forces that defy the simple logic of the need to come together for the environment and for public health and public spaces. And so I believe, based on my past and my experience, that we have a collective opportunity to benefit when we come together to dismantle racism, to work against classism and other oppressions that exist in the world. We have clean air and clean water to hope for when we work together. We have healthy land to grow our food when we come together to fight oppression. So given that background, I've taken these passions and this perspective to the National Wildlife Federation. I'm currently the Equity and Justice Manager working under our Executive Team Leader for Equity and Justice, Shante Coleman. This means that I work with staff nationwide to advance their understanding of injustice in the world so that they can make shifts in how they do their work, and they understand how this shows up in their own lived experiences and lives to ultimately make the world a better place.
That was so well spoken, both of you, and I really appreciate the complexity and the layers with which you bring forward, you know, the context of this conversation. We talk about racism, and that's the kind of dominant word that, you know, I think that is what we're talking about and what is out in the media and in a lot of the conversations. But I think it's, you know, we've talked about this in the past, is it's a little more complex than that. And so I want to talk about words, right? Because, you know, we've talked about how important words are and that they matter, and that when speaking about race, for instance, it's important not to mince them or speak in generalizations. And I think that's a really easy thing that we're doing right now because it is complex and it's difficult. So can you talk about why it is important and how we can learn to do that?
Well, I think and that it's like anything else, it's practice. And we all have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I can't say that it's even comfortable to sit here with you today and talk about these things. So there's no easy way. There's no, I don't think there's a safe way. I think it's just you have to start doing it. You have to be thoughtful when you start the conversation. I think even educate yourself before you go into the uncomfortable conversations. I would say, just like any other thing, you go into the room prepared and don't sit there and ask the person who is in the minority in the room, what is this experience like? Like, you should probably be thinking about those things before the discussion starts. And it's going to be uncomfortable forever. There is never a fun race conversation, not one that I've ever been in. I definitely feel like I have been in some very enlightening ones, but comfortable never. And I think just throw that expectation of comfort out the window.
Yes, I totally agree. Throw the expectation of comfort out the window, and for my fellow folks who are white in these conversations, recognize you are safe. You are physically safe. For the most part, in all of these conversations, I have never participated in a conversation around race and injustice and oppression where white people should feel physically unsafe. And I think that that's a really important piece to recognize, because racism is physically unsafe, is causing direct violence and harm to Black folks, brown folks, Indigenous folks. And so we need to lean in as white people who have a great deal of comfort in this space, ultimately, when it comes to our physical safety, and get uncomfortable mentally and stretch ourselves, right? And I think to your other point in your question, Malin, about using words and words mattering, and the point you made, Abra, about being prepared in a conversation, I just emphasize, when we're talking about anything, we should be doing our best to say what we mean and using precise language, because that will get us to a place of deeper and shared understanding. But that doesn't mean you should enter a conversation without doing work first. If you don't feel like you know where to begin, if you don't feel like you have the words to use, Google exists. There are tons of resources online, in books. Folks have put a lot of work into understanding how to dismantle racism. And so, do that personal education, and then, yes, dig into those uncomfortable conversations and use correct and precise terminology as you understand it, and be prepared to grow in the conversation.
I think that a lot of folks are getting a lot more access now to, the reading material and things and places to go for research. But I will say also, I think that there's a space in there for somebody to approach it with some vulnerability and just say, I'm not really sure how to talk about this, but I want to.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think that that's true. I would say generally silence reinforces the status quo and systems of oppression. I would also say at this very moment in time, I'm hearing from a lot of Black friends and colleagues that they don't want to have uninformed conversations with white folks, that they would really appreciate you doing some work before you show up and say, I'm here and I want to have a conversation. So I guess I would say, as far as silence goes as inaction, yes, don't sit idly by and not take some steps to further your understanding, to further how you can show up in this space. And also maybe consider breaking that silence may not be a literal conversation with the nearest person of color. And again, I'm speaking from a white perspective. That first step to break silence may actually be reading a book to understand more about systems of oppression, reading an article, listening to a podcast, hearing from more experts of color about what oppression looks like and your role as a white person to undoing it and showing up. But I agree fundamentally, Malin, with the idea that silence is a kind of inaction, and inaction is really forwarding oppressive status quo behavior.
And I would like to add to what Anna is saying is that the conversation about race, it really is, it's not a white versus Black thing or a white versus any other minority group. It is truly everybody versus racism. Everybody versus the racists, the people who have real problems and have a real disease and just real mental issues about thinking that they are better than because of the color of their skin. And I say that to follow up with this. We do have to choose our words carefully, but our words are also going to feel disrupted to some people. And when I say that, I'm specifically speaking to a word that makes people uncomfortable, but it is real, which is white fragility. And it is not on me to make every word I say so careful that the white people in the room feel like, whew, I'm glad she framed it that way. That takes a lot of mental gymnastics. It is very exhausting. And sometimes you just have to hear it straight up with no chaser. And I am going to choose those words the best I can, but don't expect or have that expectation or even that desire from the Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the room. Let them speak and let them speak freely in the way they need to speak, to clearly say it to you so you can understand how they are living it. Because if we always have these conversations from where I sit in a way that the words are safe or palatable for the white people in the room, we're never going to get anywhere, because we are always going to live our life exhausting ourselves to say things that make people comfortable. And that is not possible. And that is not how we make progress.
Yeah, I love that point, Abra. I think that gets to the heart in many ways of how folks need to come into these conversations and into these spaces. It gets to the point we were talking about around discomfort and comfort. And it also, I think, reinforces the need for white people, especially, to remember, if you're feeling uncomfortable, just like sit with that. And if you have a question about what's coming up or about how people are communicating to you, especially people of color, don't assume that just because you don't get it immediately or it doesn't sound accurate to you, that it isn't true or accurate. And think, like, how many conversations are you really in where folks say something that is an out and out lie or not true? People are speaking from their true lived experience. And just because you may not get that immediately does not mean that it's not true. It does not mean that it should be questioned. And if it's coming at you, especially in a way that's hard for you to hear, understand that that requires work on your part to be able to hear it, not on folks of color to figure out how to present that content in a palatable way, especially because equity and justice work and fighting oppression, because these are systems that are, complexly intertwined with all different kinds of institutions and ideologies, the work of anti-oppression and challenging these systems is countercultural and counterstructural. And so to undo it, people are going to have to speak truth that is very uncomfortable and hard for folks who benefit from those systems to hear. And so absolutely, this comes up time and again. And your point is so well taken.
So I want to continue on then a little bit deeper in talking about specifically words like colorblindness. And it's something that I know I've heard where, people say, well, I don't see color, or that claim of color blindness. Can you talk about why that's offensive or unhelpful?
For me, I know, let me be clear. I know this. I know that the majority of the time, I would even say all the time that it has been said to me is from people who in their heart mean well. So that part I understand. Why it is offensive is because when people tell me that they're colorblind or they don't see color, that to me says that they are willfully ignoring that racism is a problem. And they are, to me, clearly saying that the way you experience your life is the same way I experience mine, which simply is not true. And I do have a problem with the term. I know, again, people mean well. I just think that we have to be comfortable saying that, look, Black people didn't invent race in the first place. We didn't invent the hierarchy of it. It is a hierarchy. To see color is a real thing. And when you see color, that empowers you to address problems of racism when you see it, or when you hear it, or when you experience it. So that's something that we need to make sure that we don't use that term, because even though it's well-meaning, it does not help move the conversation forward, and it does not help you understand the experience of Black, Indigenous, or people of color at all.
Yes, I completely agree with everything Abra said. It's not a helpful term. It may have good intent, but its impact is the continued erasure of the specific lived experience of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I would also add, in doing that as well, it continues to make invisible the existence of whiteness as a race. White people too have shared, socialized, lived experiences. We don't talk about them, we don't name them often, and it's part of this package of ideas around white privilege, right? And if we cannot name that whiteness exists as well, and that whiteness has its own lived experience, we also are not going to be able to undo systems of oppression that reinforces hierarchy that Abra references in how Black folks, brown folks, other folks of color are living their lives and experiencing their lives differently than white people.
Yeah, I think that's what is so interesting about this, because I think that sometimes it's, when we talk about racism, we don't want to have racism, but we're not saying that we don't want to see race, or that, I think that that's really interesting. We're not telling people not to see race or even to celebrate different races that are out there. And we have to distinguish, I think, the difference between that, right? So how would you advise those that have fear about initiating these conversations to do that? And there's a second part to this, because I think that coupled with that is a fear of making a mistake and making things worse, and doing more damage than good.
For me, Maylin, I think that is simple. As simple as I can say this, we have to acknowledge that you're going to make mistakes along the way. What we're doing is learning, unlearning, and relearning some things right now. And the key really is education. And when you are able to put that out there and say, I don't know if the next words coming out of my mouth are going to be the right thing. Or in this moment, I realize that everybody's putting out a statement on this issue impacting the world. I don't know what to say. I'm not ignorant to it. I'm formulating my words. I will have something to say after I've thought this through. People can accept that, but to just say, this is uncomfortable for me, I just don't want to talk about it. That's not an option, because it's not an option for us not to live it. So we have to talk about it. So again, just as simple as learning, unlearning, and relearning. And I think that's, if you can start the conversation off that way, then you can say, you know what? Allow yourself to be, you said it earlier, Maylin, vulnerable, and know that you're going to make mistakes, but that is absolutely how you grow, and we are able to put an end to systemic racism in the first place.
Yes, completely agree. The only thing that I would add to that, because I agree with all of it, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, it's important to commit to do this work. I would add that for me, coming at these conversations from a perspective of both curiosity and humility is key, because I am still very much learning all the time. And if I'm not in a place where I'm actively thinking about learning and my own ignorance around these issues, I'm not going to be in a place to have those repair conversations when I do mess up, or be open to the idea of direct feedback that is going to probably make me uncomfortable, but is a real learning opportunity and frankly a gift, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm not in these spaces where I am being given this direct feedback and learning, that's a missed opportunity, even though it's also a space of discomfort. So I would just encourage white folks who may be feeling especially fragile around conversations around race and nervous about how to begin. There's no one right way to do this. The only wrong thing is to not make a commitment to try.
Amen to that.
Yeah, and so what would you advise then for public gardens and these green spaces? What can they do right now to address racism?
So, Maylin, you and I talked about this in a conversation that we had, and I think that it's good for me to say this because it just goes to show even Maylin and I, she as a multicultural, multiracial person of color, right? Me as a Black woman, even we have uncomfortable conversations. So it's not just the white people having these uncomfortable conversations. And what we talked about is in the cultural institution world, overwhelmingly, and this includes public gardens, people, I shouldn't say people, but institutions, because it's institutions. It was so difficult and so rare, and I probably could count the number of times on one hand, we could even say the word Black. Like, I get that some people still aren't to the point they can say Black Lives Matter. They're still understanding that concept, even though I think it's very clear at this point. But if we can't even say the word Black, white, Chinese, Cambodian, we have a real problem. So start there and don't look like, oh, we gotta run and get people of color on our board, or we need to make this garden look more like a rainbow. We can't even say Black. That is a problem. So say it. It is a beautiful word. Black people love being Black. We just don't like being treated Black, okay? So it's okay. It's okay to say white. It's okay to say indigenous, you know? And if you can get past that point, you can start the uncomfortable conversation. And if you can't, ask yourself, why is it so difficult for me to say Black? Why is it so difficult for me to understand why Black lives matter? Why trans lives matter? Like, seriously. Because that is a problem within itself. So if you can't get to those simple words, then you can't even start the conversation on racism. But we're smart people here, we're culture people, and we can do it.
I think you raise an interesting point too to that, which I think is in that place of not knowing. I think sometimes we can just ask the person because sometimes it's not obvious. So being say, how would you prefer to be addressed?
That's true.
Right. And I think that there's space for that. I think that hopefully people have compassion for that and understanding.
You're right.
Yeah.
And, oh, I'm sorry, Anna, I didn't mean to. If I could just jump.
No, continue.
As rah-rah as I am about saying the word Black, there are absolutely Black people that want to be dressed as African American. There are Black people that want to be dressed as Nigerian American or Jamaican American because that is what they are. Their life is lived in a duality. They are as equally Jamaican as they are American, as they are equally as Black in some cases. So we need to learn to read the room. And just because I am comfortable with you calling me a Black woman, that doesn't mean that all Black women want to hear that term. But it is important to ask people how they want to be addressed. And we have to get comfortable with addressing people by how they want that to be said based on their cultural heritage, based on their race. But we can't just not say these words. We have to do better.
I think one of the things that's coming up for me in this conversation, because I definitely agree with everything that both of you are saying, is this idea in white supremacy culture that perfectionism is an important value and that there's one right way to do things and you're either doing it that way or you're not. It's this tightly held control. And I think that gets at the heart of why it can be very hard to take that first step into this space of justice and equity and liberation, really, because liberation is not about one right way of doing things. It's about the collective. It's about a conversation. It's shifting, it's changing. It's responding to how different people may want to be addressed and understanding that, being respectful of that. And I guess it's also coming up for me right now in this moment because I'm seeing a lot of organizations putting out statements, recognizing the moment that we're in, making commitments, naming that Black Lives Matter. And those are important steps to take. And that cannot be where we stop. This is a 400-year history, specifically in this country, of anti-Black violence and racism, and we are not about to solve it in the next month, not by putting out statements. And taking those steps, making that commitment, doing this work, showing up, that is how we begin to undo this system of oppression, how this shows up for us individually, how this shows up in our institutions. And so I would ask, especially at this moment when I feel so much energy, especially from white folks that I'm talking to who are really, unfortunately, waking up some for the first time to this, that, you know, use that energy to make a long-term commitment and understand that this is a space that requires nuance, that requires both and thinking, that requires letting go of perfectionism, because yeah, you are going to make mistakes and there is no one right way. So no one is holding that secretly back from you. It's something you need to come to on your own and be in a learning space to grow and change. And so I would just, again, encourage public gardens that are interested in taking these steps to do the work, to take that first step, to make a commitment, to keep going and trying and learning, because to not act is really the failure.
You said two words that I want to dive into. And
yes,
we're going in deep. No, because I think it's really important, because, you know, there's this theme here. You know, we're talking about just naming things and talking about words, but I want to address white supremacy culture, because, and let's talk about that as a culture, right? Because I think that there's a perception that of what white supremacy looks like. So if somebody is wearing a swastika or waving a Confederate flag or has a head shaved or is donning a hood, that means they're a white supremacist. But I think it's so much more insidious and so much more layered and complex than that. And I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so this comes up a lot. I am, as I said before, a fan of using the most precise language that I know and that I feel comfortable using. And for me, white supremacy culture is a term of art, and it is different than this idea that you are referencing, Maitland, of white supremacists. And these are people who believe in the accuracy of that ideology and actively look to forward through violence, through killings, the supremacy of white people. It's often also intersecting not just with race, but with religion, right? So you often have white supremacists who believe that Christianity is the only and correct religion. You have all kinds of different powers that are held by white supremacists as accurate and correct. So those folks definitely exist. I'm talking about something else that, as you say, is more insidious and can be harder to see, and thus even more important to name, right? So white supremacy culture is upholding the supremacy of white people, is upholding the hierarchies that reinforce white people in positions of power. It's, again, often intersecting with patriarchy, with heterosexism, with cisgender, right? So folks who hold power in society, in socialized groups, have set structures in our society, right? So if you look at who our presidents have been, who the presidents of colleges are, where the money flows in our country, who members of Congress are, these are often going to be straight white men. And that is one way of assessing that white supremacy culture is present. Another way to assess that it's present is through some of these traits that I was naming previously, right? Like perfectionism, one right way, either or thinking. These are tied up in professionalism standards in a way that can be deployed by folks who have power to maintain power. So if there's one right way of doing things, the people who are in charge get to tell you what that one right way is. And that can change because it's really them holding on to power. So this term is important to talk about. If it's making you uncomfortable, great, welcome that discomfort. Google this. Tema Okun has a really, really wonderful piece breaking down white supremacy culture traits and digging into this. this is not something that Anna Brunner is making up here. This is something that is really a term of art and is widely discussed and used. So if it's making you uncomfortable, if you've not heard about it before in the way I'm talking about it, I so encourage you to lean into that curiosity and do some Googling and then some questioning, and then maybe come back again and think about it a month later, because this is a subtle idea for many white people, and I want to emphasize that because I imagine that for the folks of color who may be listening to this, hopefully what I'm saying is resonating in some way. So I'm going to end it there, but thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, no, I love the way you articulated that difference, and just that there's also some action that needs to take place.
I would add just to what you said that, again, there's the tobacco chewing, Confederate flag waving white supremacists, which is the person that's not hiding it, which is actually the person you can probably interact with in a real way because they're not lying to you about where they stand. You know this. Then there is a level of white supremacy that we even have to look into, because this is specifically for public gardens, in the world of public gardens, how our gardens got on the land that they're on, how that land was built off the backs of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, how the accumulated wealth that supports those gardens. Did you really work hard? Yeah, you did. So did we, so the spaces that you're in that are so comfortable for you, realize that they were built off of white supremacy. Realize that the spaces that they're in, it's not by design. There aren't many people of color in your gardens overwhelmingly. That was redlining. And so you have to educate yourself, even in our space, when you look around the room while we aren't here, and remind yourself of the gift that so many people gave you for free, that your wealth was built off the back of other people, that our gardens were built that way. So a lot of people don't want to hear that, but it's the truth. And that is white supremacy in itself, just in the public garden world. And then there's minor cases of white supremacy where even, again, well-meaning people, and Maylin may or may not remember this, we were on a trip to Ann Arbor. We were in a pho restaurant, completely Asian staff. I was the only Black person in the restaurant. However, when I got up to go use the restroom and came back, a white lady tapped me on the shoulder to ask for her check. How she thought I was working there is white supremacy. She absolutely believed that the brown one must be the service person. So we really have to check our privilege, our egos. We have to really acknowledge, like, that is part of that culture. Like, why would you believe that it was me? Why didn't you, tap Nanette, the British one with blonde hair and blue eyes that was also with me? So white supremacy is not just the Klan hood wearing, person. It's a lot of layers, and that's a whole discussion in itself. And that was my point I wanted to add.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Abra. And I think that that's what's powerful as well, is being able to relate to these personal experiences and just kind of bring some, I think some of those details to that, these experiences, these lived experiences, because we talk about lived experiences, but I think it's nice to shine a spotlight on that. So I wanted to then kind of shift this just a little bit and talk on the other side of this kind of, I guess, I don't know if it's two sides of the same coin, actually, which is this topic that's also coming up, which is white fragility. So I want to open that up to you both and being able to talk about what that is and what that means in this conversation.
So since I'm in the moment of giving real life examples, I can remember one, and this was a situation again where it was a well-meaning person, and I was asked in front of a group of people, again being the only Black person in the room, not the only person of color, what I thought it would be like to be part of the Longwood Fellowship. And I said, and this was really when we started first week, and I said, it's like preparing for a heavyweight championship, because in my mind, I was like Muhammad Ali. I had reached the top. I wanted to be the greatest of all time, and that's why I was in this fellowship. But the teacher who was in the room stopped me in my tracks and said, when you say heavyweight championship fight, it makes you sound like an angry Black woman, or heavyweight championship is what I said. She said that the words heavyweight championship made it sound like I was fighting and that was angry. And I had to explain to her, I am angry. But the point of this story is that that is white fragility. I have to be so careful with my words around white people where they don't feel threatened that I can't even say the word heavyweight championship without it being misconstrued as I am angry. When I am thinking about one of the greatest human beings ever, who is Muhammad Ali, and I am sitting amongst some of the most great people I've ever met in public gardens. But again, white fragility. So I'm left in the room, it's super awkward, and I have to play nice and just, listen to her go on and sit there. And that is not okay, that we have to always constantly have our words policed so that it makes everyone else feel comfortable and safe, because there was nothing about that statement that should have made her feel anger in me. So that was something I wanted to share that is very real and something that happens all the time in our world.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Abra. And also, that just sounds incredibly exhausting to have to deal with. I think that that's part of why, if you are a white person who is committed to collective liberation and Black liberation and undoing oppression, that it is incredibly important you understand what white fragility is, so that you are limiting the number of times that you're having to make your Black colleagues and friends feel exhausted and do this work to navigate whiteness. I think part of why white fragility exists is because white people are conditioned as part of white supremacy culture to not see whiteness as a thing, as a race. And so we are unequipped and unpracticed at talking about race, at thinking about race, speaking about race. And so when we have such little practice, if you think of it as a muscle, right? The muscle's just atrophied. It hasn't been practiced at all. And so trying to use it, trying to engage with it is incredibly painful really quickly. And the great news is, like a muscle, you can exercise it. You can get better at talking about race. You can overcome feeling so fragile so quickly when it comes to speaking about race, being a white person in a room with a lot of folks of color. You can practice and get better. And I think one of the resources that folks are probably familiar with, and if you're not, I encourage you to investigate more, is a book written by Robin DiAngelo called White Fragility, which Robin DiAngelo is a white equity and justice trainer. And so her book is really digging into her experience as both a white person, but also training other white people, often in multiracial situations, and analyzing sort of patterns of using whiteness to stop conversations, recentering the conversation when we're talking about race and racism back to white people's lived experiences, and all of the different ways in which white fragility shows up, makes this work especially exhausting for Black folks and people of color. And it's an incredibly important read if you want to make a commitment to justice and undoing the oppression and the violence that you may be visiting upon folks of color if you are not sort of self-aware. And the book is really important to read.
Thank you both. And we've definitely mentioned a couple of resources and books, and just wanted to let everybody listening know or watching this that we will be publishing the list of what we've talked about, but we also have others that we will be putting out there on the discussion platform. The IDEA Committee as well, we have a web page, and which is chock full of resources that we've been collecting and hoarding for 3 years, or actually maybe 4 years now. So a lot to get through. There's a lot of material there, and we're going to continue to develop and work on that as well.
You're welcome. And if I could just add one more thing. I love that there have been so many resources provided for people, especially the books. And I want to say, especially to white people, it is okay to show up at the Malcolm X parade. It is okay to show up at the Cambodian temple. It is okay to show up in the hood to get some food. Like, put yourself in our spaces as well, because we are always in your spaces. So to work through your white fragility, don't just read books and talk to the Black people that you know, that you went to Brown or Auburn with. interact with real people, real Black, Indigenous, and people of color in their real spaces, and not just during Black History Month. Like, do it in June, do it in November, make it a normal thing for you. So that's all I wanted to add, is to get outside of your comfort zone, literally in real life.
Abra and Anna, I deeply am grateful for your time today and for your voices and for sharing that with all of us. I can't speak enough to just the candor and the honesty with which you spoke. So thank you again. So with that, I wanted to open up this conversation, see if anybody else had any comments or things they wanted to talk about or ask.
Thanks for attending the IDEA Cafe. I'm Adriana. I'm the incoming co-chair of the IDEA Committee. Now more than ever, we need to have voices that are champions for all our diverse people. And we want to be able to give them a place and a platform to be heard. You can become one of those people by either nominating yourself to come and join our committee. We really would love to have you. Or maybe you know somebody else who is a great voice for our diverse community and you would like to nominate them as well. We would love to have them join us on our committee. We're looking for nominations right now. The association has posted a link and you can find all the information there.